Now, the Eagles will play a preseason game tonight against the Jets, as they do every year at the end of the preseason. Tonight's will be at MetLife Stadium up in East Rutherford, New Jersey, and it won't matter. And if you read the timeline of John McMullen, as we're about to bring him in, you'll know that most of, if not all, of the decisions that are related to the 53-man roster have already been made. And so the two teams are going to play tonight, and it's not going to matter one single bit when it comes down to the decisions that are due by 4 o'clock on Saturday. So as we bring John McMullen in, we say, John, what is the point?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's the most pointless trip of the season, and I'm making it right now. I'm driving up right now. So, hey, these fourth preseason games, I think, are the ugliest week of the year for a lot of reasons, not just the aesthetic nature on the field, but also what you just mentioned. There's so many players that are rolled out there that will be cut by Saturday. Their dream will be over, and the only reason they're out there is so the valuable players can't get hurt. So it's an ugly setup, and hopefully the league changes it very quickly.
The one, I guess, sensible thing about the fourth preseason game, at least from an Eagles-Jets standpoint, is that the proximity of the teams. Like, can you imagine the team, the beat writer, everybody having to fly all the way out to Detroit tonight for a meaningless preseason game? I mean, they're all meaningless, but an extra meaningless preseason game, that would be a disaster.
Yeah, that's the one thing. Obviously, the Jets always play the Eagles in the final preseason game, and it's a lot nicer when it's in Philadelphia, but it could be worse.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody tries to do that. They try to schedule games, preseason games, in their general area. Sometimes you can't because there's not enough teams. But, yeah, I mean, hey, Joe Douglas likes to sit in the press box. I'm hoping to see him for 5 minutes. That's pretty much why I'm coming.
Makes it a trip well worth taking. Real quick, before we get into the Eagles and the 53-man, I was talking earlier with Josh here and Hunter Brody about MetLife Stadium and the $2 billion that they poured into it for both the Giants and the Jets. And I think it's a very Spartan type of stadium. It doesn't do anything for me. It's antiseptic. I call it no-life stadium. Do you concur with that, or do you think it's a nice stadium?
No, I think it is very utilitarian, and that's the reason why, because it's got to be shared. And
Right.
They sort of change from game to game, whether it's the Jets or the Giants, and they made it to the point where they can change the look of the stadium and turn it from green to blue. And so when you do that, you lose some stuff that makes it unique. So I think that's fair. It's not exactly the most exciting stadium in the world, but as with most newer stadiums, I mean, the amenities are nicer, I will say that.
Sure. It's just that for $2 billion and to be in New York City, and such a big city and a city of prominence, it just there's nothing about it that stands out to me. I don't like the stadium in Dallas, but at least I can say there are things that make it stand out or make it unique. I don't know. I just feel like MetLife Stadium is it's like the world's largest, could be a hospital. It's just antiseptic. There's nothing about it.
Yeah, and that's and I think the same thing is going to happen in Los Angeles. I really do, because they're going to have to share it. So when you have to share something, there's some things you have to give up. And I think that's one of the problems when you have that type of situation. But New York and Los Angeles, as much you really want to build two, in that case, it'll be a $3 billion stadium. So you don't want to make two of them, so you kind of you try to do the best you can.
Amazing. All the money going into stadiums. Let's talk about the 53-man roster. Obviously, each team has to be down to 53 by 4 o'clock Saturday. I'm sure you've done your 53-man projection. I'm going to do – I think what complicates it is the injuries and not knowing who's going to start if anyone will start the year on IR, like maybe with the designation to return, like a Nate Sudfeld, maybe a Camus. We don't know what's going on with Brandon Brooks, although it sounds like he can't go on any list. He'll just may not be ready to start right away. But did you find that in putting your roster together that you don't know what they're going to do with some of those guys?
Yeah, I think that's what, and I tweeted that out earlier as well. I think that's what makes it more difficult this season is the fact they have so many short-term injuries, and you have to kind of feel who they're going to put on the 53, because if you're on the preseason 53, obviously you can't come back in the season. You're done for the season if you go on IR. So if you want to be IR designated to return, you have to be on that original 53, and then you can go on that and miss 8 weeks. So the Eagles have a lot of decisions to make, and the only guarantees are pretty much Camus and probably Nate Sudfeld. I would say 90%. Other than that, the Crevan LeBlancs, the Richard Rodgers of the world, you got to make a decision. Mm-hmm. And I'm coming up on the parking lot, so we might say hi to the parking lot attendant. Just warning you guys.
Oh, yeah. Please wish him or her the best from all three of us. When you say the Camus and you say Nate Sudfeld, do you think that they will start the year on IR with designation to return? Either of them?
Well, no, certainly not Camus.
Yeah, not Camus.
And as I said, you have to go on the original 53 anyway. Mm-hmm. And then you can kind of, after that, you can put them on designated to return. Right. And that's a possibility for Nate Sudfeld. I mean, that could happen because they've made their decision with backup quarterback. Let's be honest. It's right. Josh McCown. Not only did they pay him the money, you saw he doesn't even have to show up on Fridays now. They made a deal with him so he can go coach his kid's high school team. I mean, they wanted him in a bad way. So he's the backup quarterback, so I'm not sure how much you need a third-string quarterback anyway. So I could see him being a candidate depending on, Crevan looks great walking into the shower. And then when he comes out of the shower, he's got to put the boot back on and he's got to go around in the walkabout. Yeah. So that's a bit of a strange injury. Richard Rodgers, and by the way, Jordan Mailata as well with the back injury. Remember, he got shut down in December last season because his back was bothering him. And he's been telling us pretty much along the way that it still sometimes is an issue. And all of a sudden crops up. He's not going to play tonight, misses practice. He's another guy you got to throw into that conversation. So there's a lot of them, and that's what makes it more difficult on trying to figure out this original 53, which, as you know, Jeff, the original 53 is not going to be the 53 come week one on Sunday against the Redskins.
Yeah, they should call it the amorphous 53. I mean, it's just constantly changing thereafter. We put such a big deal. Oh, who's going to make the 53? Who's going to make the 53? And 24 hours later, it's the 3 or 4 guys that could be completely different. So I agree with you on that. But also, what goes involved in that, Howie Roseman, always very active at the trade deadline, trying to move guys that he's not going to keep, which is always difficult because then teams know they'll be available. But then some teams like to try to get ahead on the rest of the teams if they're low on the waiver wire. So do you see Howie making a deal right before the deadline, and who do you think might be in that group of Eagles that could be dealt?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny because you talk about, and obviously the big name out there is Jadeveon Clowney, and as you know, Jeff,
I hadn't heard.
Generally, it's agents who kind of run this stuff and put out names and teams that might be interested in their clients. But that's what makes the Clowney stuff so interesting because he fired Bus Cook. But in that type of instance, the Eagles are always mentioned because Howie always likes to make deals. Mm-hmm. So they kind of use them, whether there's real interest or there isn't real interest. But 9 times out of 10, there's real interest because Howie likes to trade people. And one of the problems, and you talk about Clowney and the Texans want a left tackle, and you can say the Eagles are one of the few teams in this league with Halapoulivaati Vaitai who can play left tackle that might have a surplus at the position. But I don't know if you can make a deal because Brandon Brooks isn't healthy yet. He's not cleared. You have no idea if he's going to be there. And Vaitai's more likely than not, I would say at this point, going to be the starting right guard on week 1.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the most likely scenario.
Yep.
But if you're looking for back end of the trades, you've already seen them, whether it's Eli Harold, whether it's Rudy Ford, and trades on the back end of the roster. Joe Douglas, I just talked about him. I mean, he's going to have interest. The Jets are third in the waiver wire pickup situation. They'll have third choice. They need cornerbacks. They need linebackers. So you have guys like T.J. Edwards and Josh Hawkins who might not be exciting to the fan base, even an Alex Singleton. Does Joe think somebody's going to pick him up? Does somebody else want those players? So those are the kind of guys that might be dealt. But I still think a big splash, Jadeveon Clowney, I think that's really unlikely.
John, speaking of Joe Douglas, is there anybody currently on the roster bubble that you would identify as a Joe Douglas potential target?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I just mentioned at linebacker, specifically at corner, I would keep an eye on Josh Hawkins. I know Joe liked him when he brought him in here. The Jets have a real dearth of issues at the quarterback position. They need multiple bodies. So that could be somebody who's probably not going to make the team here. I mentioned T.J. Edwards. Remember, Joe handled the 2019 draft and the undrafted class. Didn't leave until afterwards, so he knows that class really well. So Alex Singleton, who's not a rookie, but he would be, as a linebacker, bubble player here, he would be another of interest. DeAndre Hall, who he brought in last year here, is probably not going to make the team. That would be another logical candidate. But, it's funny because the Eagles are a deep team. They are. It's fair to say that. But, if you look at it, I think everybody does this every year. They overrate the waiver wire. Can you get this guy through waivers? So I went back last year. 39 guys all across the league were claimed after the first cut to 53. 39. There's 32 teams. Do the math. That means under 2 per team. Now, the Eagles, as one of the best, will probably more likely get maybe 3, maybe 4 claimed. Some of the worst teams, I remember Cleveland at one point picked 5. But this weird, it's like everybody forgets every year. Oh, they're going to get everybody claimed. That doesn't happen in this league. You spend months working on your own talent. You're not going to make wholesale changes unless you're really, really bad. And wholesale changes are defined as like 5. It's not an outrageous number.
Talking with John McMullen. You can read his work on 973ESPN.com. Has a story up right now on 973ESPN.com about Fletcher Cox being ready for week 1. He's missed a lot of time, John. The whole defensive line, it's been so strange. I mean, you've had Fletcher Cox really not participate. Derek Barnett, who came in late, coming off the surgery. Vinny Curry has quietly just been there and the addition that he's supposed to be. Malik Jackson hasn't played much, if at all, in the preseason game. So we haven't seen a lot of the guys that we're expecting to see in the season opener. And you wonder, about how conditioned they're going to be. Brandon Graham got off to a slow start last year. He'll be the first to tell you he didn't have his get off because he didn't have a whole lot of training camp time. And now you're talking about multiple people just on the D-line who have the same situation going on. And a part of that, what do you think they do with Deshaun Hall in this whole who's going to be the 4th defensive end race?
Well, I think they're going to go deep at defensive end, and it's interesting because I think a lot of people don't think they're deep at defensive end, or at least that's been one of the narratives that I don't think the organization agrees with. I think they like Deshaun. I think they like Josh Sweat. I think they know Sharif Miller's not ready to play a lot year one, but they still like him as a prospect. So I could see him keeping 6 at defensive end and keeping 4 defensive tackles, and you get to that 10 number, and that's always a possibility. You can go in that direction. Deshaun, I mean, he deserves to make this team. He has outplayed Josh Sweat. He has outplayed Sharif Miller. I don't see how they can cut him, and I do think he should be the 4th defensive end in that rotational system, which won't get a ton of time.
Right.
But it's important in how Jim Schwartz runs his defense. And I think people forget, Deshaun Hall, people talk about Josh Sweat and Sharif Miller being draft picks, 4th-round picks. Well, he's a 3rd-round pick, a former 3rd-round pick in Carolina. So it's not like he doesn't have a skill set. And if you look at him, he looks like a defensive end in this league. One of his issues is he's had to go back. Yeah, he's had to go back from 4.3 to 3.4 and back again. So he's had to gain weight, but he's got a lot of talent.
Could you see possibly Howie trying to capitalize on his camp and trade him at the deadline here, cut down deadline?
You never say never because of the numbers game, and he isn't going to play a ton. So I don't want to overrate his impact to the team. So if you get value in return, that's one you could certainly think about trading off and saying, we do have young players we also have confidence in who might not be as good right now, but maybe will be better down the line. So, yeah, he would be in that conversation. But I think it's not a situation where they'd be peddling him. It's more of if somebody has a real need and they offer something of great value, I think you could pull the trigger because of the depth.
John McMullen joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. You can follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. For all your Eagles and NFL news, Jeff Mosher, Josh Hennig, Hunter Brody filling in for Mike Gill on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. John, one of the things that you and Jeff didn't bring up yet is about Charles Johnson, the receiver who got put on the IR. How much of that is just a procedural move just to get through the 4th preseason game, and how much of that is actually them interested in keeping him after down the road or anything? Or is it just they're trying to move him off the roster so they can have the bodies they need for the 4th game, and then they'll move on to an injury settlement?
Yeah, I think more likely what you just said, it'll be an injury settlement situation. Obviously, as I mentioned, preseason IR means you're done for the season from an Eagles perspective. Charles was on the field Tuesday working on a separate field. It doesn't look like a serious injury at all. Remember, he's 30 years old, so this is not a stash situation. He's been around for a while, not only in the NFL but also in the AAF this spring, which got him another look. So ultimately, I think that will be an injury settlement. And, yeah, it's to get because they don't have tackles. Jason Sanders isn't going to play. Lane Johnson isn't going to play. Jordan Mailata is not ready to play. I would be stunned if Andre Dillard is going to play in this game. So all of a sudden you're talking, are you going to play Brett Toth, who's been here a couple weeks and hasn't even been, he's been doing his Army service, hasn't even been working out to be a football player all that long, and Matt Pryor, who's mostly been playing guard, needed a body to play tackle tonight. And it's one of those ugly situations that I mentioned. And Charles wasn't going to make the team, so you kind of make the move a little bit early so you get another player in to play tackle.
Talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. John, does Steph Wisniewski make this team?
I'm leaning towards no for a number of reasons. There's always as you know, if you're a vested veteran, Jeff, if you're on the week 1 roster, that means your salary is guaranteed for the season. So I think there's a number of guys to keep an eye on. Orlando Scandrick is in that category. Jonathan Cyprian is in that category. And so is Wiz. It could be a situation where the Eagles say, you know what, we're going to cut you and keep Nate Herbig, who's an undrafted rookie, who's impressed us with his versatility. He's taken to playing center. Never played center before. He handles the shotgun snap better than Wiz in practice. So I think they like him. And they might say, you know what, we'll revisit week 2, week 3. If we don't feel comfortable, then we'll bring you back, and we don't have to guarantee your full salary. So I think he's in that category, and there's a potential that he will be released.
It's crazy because you start camp and you think, man, the Eagles have really good depth on the offensive line, especially in the interior where you have Steph Wisniewski, who was a starter on the Super Bowl team and a key backup last year, and you've got Matt Pryor, a guy that they liked last year at this time, and he spent the whole year on the team, and he's practicing at guard, and then also who am I missing? Another interior. Oh, Big V, who is going to start, as you said, for Brandon Brooks, but it's not because he's been great, but just because he's been, reliable in the past. He has not had a great camp or preseason. So all of a sudden that great interior line depth that we thought they had going into the year doesn't look so good, or as good, I should say.
Well, I think as a whole, the Eagles are very comfortable with their offensive line depth. I do think they like Vaitai, for instance, more than other people do outside the organization. And I shouldn't even say that because I think somebody like Houston would be very interested, but I'm not sure they would like to peddle him at this point because of the uncertainty with Brandon Brooks. But then there are other guys, as you mentioned, Wiz. And you've seen signs of this. I mean, every year Jeff Stoutland plays Wiz, but kind of begrudgingly.
Yeah.
He doesn't really want to. And he's always looking for a more athletic option, and I think it's playing out again. And then a Matt Pryor, who I think people look at and say he's got great size, he's got great ability, but I don't know if the technique is necessarily there. He's been caught for a lot of penalties in preseason work. So maybe that group isn't quite as good as people thought when this process started. But on the other hand, I think Vaitai is better than people think. I think Dillard has been even more than advertised as a natural pass protector. So I still think when you compare it to the rest of the league, the Eagles are pretty comfortable with the offensive line, and that's even with Brandon Brooks still working his way back.
All right, well, John McMullen has arrived at MetLife Stadium. He is very close to passing through the toll booths, if not yet. We didn't hear a hi from the attendant, but, again, give everybody over there our best. And, look, it doesn't mean anything, but you still have to be there, and we're going to talk to you about it tomorrow, all right?
Yeah, and hopefully I'll talk to Joe, and we'll have some nuggets.
Yeah, that would be great. All right, John, take it easy and enjoy your night.
All right, thank you, guys.